Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 24th episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. As we approach Valentine's Day and commercial love being in the air, I've decided that today's podcast is all about exploring people of colour, sex and mental health. And I'm joined by the expert in this area, Dr Annabel Sowemimo. Dr Annabel Sowemimo is a community sexual and reproductive health doctor, having completed an MSc in sexual and reproductive health research. At medical school, Annabel assisted in developing training for medical students on female genital mutilation, FGM, and continues to campaign on a range of reproductive justice issues. She's a contributor for online platforms, including Black Ballad, The Independent, and Galdem.com, writing on a range of health, social justice, and cultural issues. Annabel is also the founder of Decolonizing Contraception, a community interest company aimed at addressing the unethical history in sexual and reproductive health, particularly experimentation on people of colour. Decolonizing contraception is about understanding how culture and history impact these populations and affect how they experience sexual and reproductive health. And I'm delighted to say that Decolonizing Contraception have completed their crowdfunding campaign to create the first sexual health and wellbeing festival, SexFest, for people of colour in the UK, and it's taking place on the 18th of April 2020. And Annabel firmly believes that healthcare should be about empowering people with knowledge to make informed choices about their bodies. She spends her spare time campaigning on reproductive justice, NHS cuts, and improving healthcare for marginalised groups. When she's not in scrubs or in clinic, she can be found at a protest with a placard or the theatre. Annabel, I'm really delighted to welcome you to the show.
Hi, thank you, Luna, and thanks for having me. Also, that intro makes me sound like I should just, I can just relax now because that was such a nice introduction. Thank you.
No, you're welcome, and very well deserved. So I know Annabel because we are in the same book group, and I'm really, it's brilliant that you've come on today. So I've given a little bit of background about decolonizing contraception, and I just, and there is some information, of course, as to why it's so important and why it's needed. But what made you decide to start DC, and how did you do that?
Well, as you said in your introduction, I started writing and being a journalist about 5 years ago now, and I was writing about lots of different things. And when I started sexual reproductive health training, I started writing about some of the issues and the things that I saw. And one of the things that cropped up is just kind of the long legacy and history that people of colour have with reproductive health and sexual health in terms of it being used for things like population control or stigma and taboo, and where certain issues have come from and how they've been reinforced. So I wrote an article about it, and after I wrote that article and it was on Galdem, I had lots of different people messaging me and also talking to me in social settings about it, and just saying actually lots of those conversations I would like to have in real life with other people like me, and just want to see how we can take that further. So then it just spiraled into me talking to colleagues from similar backgrounds that work in sexual reproductive health, and then that turned into trying to do more events and things. It just really escalated from there.
I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because often we don't set off on a path to do something, but we follow our passion and we follow what we believe in. And it is amazing how other people get behind you, and it grows into a movement.
Absolutely. One thing I will say with decolonizing contraception, it was lots of different ideas and combined ideologies that I had in my head from various pieces of reading that I'd done in different sectors, not just sexual reproductive health, not just medicine, but looking at historical information and looking at social sciences, and then talking to people about it. And when you have ideas in your head, you never know if when you speak them out loud, people are going to start laughing at you, or they're going to embrace it and be like, actually, no, I thought that too. And it's been really nice, actually, because I've had a lot more of the latter response.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we keep trying to do more, and we keep trying to have different discussions, because it's like every discussion that we have, whether that's about cisgendered women, patriarchy and the pill, which was like one of the first kind of talks we did, from that discussion people raised loads of interesting points, and then we went on to have more discussions. So yeah, it's just been spiraling, and that's been really, really nice.
Oh. And, as a doctor and campaigner, and you might see them as one thing, you might see them as separately, what do you think have been your key career learning points?
So first of all, I see them as very much joined because of the interest that I have. First of all, I think that healthcare is a basic human right, and everybody should have access to good quality healthcare. So by definition, that kind of guides my principles and work as a doctor, and the issues that I care about, and the social justice issues that I care about. However, I'm acutely aware that not every doctor or health professional or people that work in healthcare feel the same way. And then there's also this whole thought that actually, as a doctor or somebody providing healthcare, that you're supposed to be really objective and not have any kind of political views, which I find quite ridiculous, because I just don't think that's true. That can be true of anybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I find them deeply intertwined. They influence each other, and the issues and the steps that I take in terms of career-wise, definitely. And I found that being in the medical profession, especially in the UK, it's really interesting, because actually a lot of doctors try to take a step back politically, or tell themselves that they're apolitical because they think they're not supposed to be. So that's been quite an interesting barrier to being an advocate, activist, campaigner.
So I guess your key learning points are that actually you have to do what you believe in, you have to step forward and use your kind of political stance, and medicine go very much hand in hand for you, and doing what's right and doing things outside the boundary of your role.
So yeah, I think essentially one of the key learning points that very much come from decolonizing contraception is that you ultimately, everybody has biases, prejudice, and political stances, and it's how far we choose to acknowledge those as a reality, and how they manifest in our work. And that's a lot of what I try to discuss with people, that you may think you don't have these things, but you do, and we have to challenge and discuss them if we're going to kind of progress, and change the area of practice, not that I just work in, but anybody works in. I think a lot of the things that we discuss around decolonizing contraception and sex and reproductive health are just applicable to a lot of different areas and a lot of different fields. And yeah, definitely, just if you have an idea, definitely always speak it out loud, and then you never know, you might not just be the lone person having those thoughts. Loads of people may agree and join you. You never know where it might go.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful and very true, and how you can get genuine allies from doing that.
Yeah, allies is very important.
Yeah, I know, because otherwise we feel like we're in isolation, don't we?
Yeah, and I think there is a lot to be said about surrounding yourself with not just people that always agree with you. That's something I feel really strongly about. I feel like you have to have people that are willing to challenge you. And I always say that never be threatened by people that are cleverer than you. Surround yourself by people that are cleverer than you. But allyship is so, so important. A lot of the things that I do on a day-to-day basis, I do not pretend that they've come into being just because of me. I have like a very solid group of friends, colleagues, senior and junior people that have mentored me. I'm constantly asking people for assistance and help. Yeah, you just have to be really humble.
Yeah, that's a very powerful learning point as well. So I mentioned the Sex Fest on April the 18th, 2020. So can you tell us more about that, how it's shaping up, and really what you would see as the aims of the day, and actually the outcomes and what you want people to go away with? And, this is obviously very exciting because you crowdfunded for it. It was a big project.
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's really important to understand kind of the ideology and where it's come from. So first of all, a lot of people aren't aware within sexual reproductive health, there are really huge health inequalities, particularly for Black, Asian and Latin communities in the UK. Now, the reasons for this are variable because obviously each demographic can be broken down further and have their different needs. But some of the problems are similar or the same, around not being able to access services, not getting the education they need, services not being tailored in the right way. So we have really huge gaps, whether that's uptake of cervical screening, vaccination programs, sexually transmitted infections, poor access for particularly queer communities. So there's a lot of issues around sexual reproductive health issues in the UK, and the gaps are really, really massive. So some of these health inequalities have actually not improved at all for over a decade, and some of them are actually getting worse.
Yeah.
So I just looked at the scene around me, and I know the discussions that I'm having within certain communities and my own community that don't seem to be reaching the people that, design services or really have the power. And I just thought, I get to be in rooms that some people don't get to be in, and it's just time to do things differently, because actually people do want to have these conversations. They just want to have them in very specific ways, and often the funding isn't there for these projects or these services because they don't fit a conventional model. So that's what the Sex Fest is about. So it's about coming together. We're going to have a festival, so essentially different types of workshops throughout the day, catering to a range of different communities. There'll be sexual health screening. Afterwards, there'll be kind of like a party with poetry and music, still along the lines of sexual reproductive health. But it's taking away, I guess, some of the stigma and the isolation that a lot of people feel when they have to go and access a sexual health clinic, and also people not knowing where to go. It's supposed to be a bit more of a relaxed thing. So yeah, I'm really hoping that it will be a really great day, and also it will give people opportunities to network so they can go away and do things and collaborate and learn about other charities or organizations that exist.
Yeah, because often you don't know what you don't know, do you? And you think, I've got to put up with this, I've got to suffer with this, or this is embarrassing, all sorts of things. So I think that's going to be crucial for people. And I know you're also you've opened up the opportunity for people to run workshops, and I couldn't remember when the deadline was for applications.
So the deadline will be the end of the month, but I didn't really set a firm deadline because we've had lots of interest. I'm still going to speak to lots of different people, so I keep getting more and more suggestions from people, and I want to give people maximum opportunity to apply, but it's going to probably be solidly the end of January, and we'll keep volunteer opportunities open a bit longer, so people can fill out on our website. People can also fill out applications to volunteer and also have stalls. So for any charities or other groups that are quite like-minded, there'll be an area for stalls so people can browse, even buy things like that are kind of related to the field, and have conversations and things like that. So there's a lot of opportunities to get involved. It's going to be in Camden, at 2 venues in Camden, near Camden Market. There's an information pack again on our website, which gives you a bit more information about that. So yeah, I just really want as many people, and lots of people have already, and it's been really, really heartwarming that like everybody seems to be engaging with it. Yes, I just want people to get involved as much as possible, really, and build connections, and people to find their people through this festival.
Yeah, I think I'm very much looking forward to attending.
Thank you.
So in your eyes, what have you seen in relation to, in terms of the challenges of people of colour in the UK, sex and mental health? So what might the challenges be for people with sexual health? How does it then impact on their mental health? And of course, being people of colour, how does that add an additional layer?
I mean, the area is just massive. First of all, I'd say that it's something that we're only just scratching the surface on, and there's really poor research around it and how they correlate. But I think what is abundantly clear is that the huge health inequalities that you see in mental health and access to services are directly mirrored in sexual health in the UK, which is really interesting. That there's similar outcomes for both populations. So I think they're actually quite deeply correlated. So one of the biggest things, and there was a study recently done in terms of the PRIME study with UCL, which is about HIV in the menopause. But as HIV becomes a chronic condition, obviously women living with HIV are living longer, and there was a clear disparity there between the women living with HIV, Black African women, and their white counterparts in terms of the mental health issues that they were facing, and living with this chronic disease. So whether that's the stigma or discrimination they face internally with their communities or from outsiders is unclear. But there is real proof coming through that these things are kind of intrinsically linked. Another thing that decolonizing contraception is quite passionate about is culturally sensitive sex education. So obviously this is very specific to each community, but definitely amongst the background I'm from. So I am British Nigerian, and talking about sex and things like that when you're younger is really taboo. It's not done. People don't get the education, and then it's kind of expected that in your early 20s you're going to get married and you're going to have kids and you're going to understand all of those things, but there's not really a clear in between about how you get there. And these things can lead to people either having to suppress their sexuality, not understanding things like when they're actually being taken advantage of and abuse. So there's a lot of linkage around, people not being sexually open or not having that opportunity or really understanding their identities, and having poor mental health outcomes. But how they link, again, we've not got great evidence on, so there's a lot of just hypothesizing about how these things work. But one thing I would say is that I'm not sure if you've read the book Queenie.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I always bring it up by Candy Carty-Williams. I really like it, and I spoke about it lots last year because the protagonist is a Black Caribbean woman, and she essentially goes through a lot of difficulty in terms of like her mental health, and it really manifests in like in poor sexual health choices, and she struggles, and it shows how those two link quite clearly. And it brings up loads of discussions about trying to have conversations with some of your seniors around those issues, particularly around mental health, them not really believing that poor mental health is a thing, not being able to be sexually open. So how we start to address these things, one of my big things is about talking and language, and this is something that always crops up time and time again. A lot of people just haven't been given the space to sit in rooms with people that look like them, have experienced similar things to they have, and talk about what those experiences meant, what it meant not to be able to talk about those things, how they can talk about them for their own children, and how we can like do better or be better. And I think that's one of the ways that we can kind of try to improve sexual and mental health.
I really hear you on the culture of silence. Obviously, it's different in South Asian communities, and again, within that, I'm not going to generalize. I'm going to talk about my experience, but and for some of my friends, there have experienced a massive culture of silence, and how it is really taboo. And when you were saying that, I could definitely relate to that, because that's very much, or if anything came on TV, kissing or anything, the channel was changed. So you're left with this sense of shame as well, I think, around the subject. And I'm not criticizing, it is what it is. And I think there's a lot of cultural decorum around it. But yeah, until we break that culture of silence, we're not going to be able to move forward.
And I think a really important thing is that around that, people always kind of ask or question why, we organize as like people of color, and they're like, why are you kind of like lumping people of color together when they have different cultural experiences? And what I say is that really people of color organizing has kind of been forced on a lot of people, because the status quo and what is considered normal is usually whiteness and white supremacy as an ideology. So in terms of diaspora communities, people often, having to fit around that ideal or try to understand their own identity in comparison to that. And that's not just on, a national level. That is really kind of become, because of colonialism and things like that, that's become the international status quo, that people measure themselves against. Educational systems kind of use often, even, when you go to the global south, very westernized systems. So it's really about trying to talk about otherness, and how when we do things like sexual health and reproductive health, how for some other people there are so many other facets of their identity that feed into how they experience health, and not just sexual health, which are often very much overlooked. People just say, oh, that person is, I don't know, Black British, so that service, or the way that they're going to experience that system is going to be exactly the same as their white counterpart. And actually it's just so much more complicated than that for a lot of us.
Yeah, I was talking about this as well on the body positive episode with Sarah Daisy Bernard, and we were talking about how the body positive movement, it's great, but it does need to be more inclusive. So similarly, obviously with health services, and there's not one type of Black British either. So again, how different Black British communities are going to experience those services differently as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is something that, I talk about and I've been advocating for so much more, is that, although we organise as this collective to discuss about similar issues that affect us and loads of overarching problems, we have people from all different demographics under that, POC umbrella. And fundamentally, even within Black communities, when we break down like sexual reproductive health inequalities, we see huge differences about what our problems are. And some of the issues actually that have been allowed to manifest for so long have in part been caused by the fact that statistics have been lumping people together, like under a BAME umbrella or whatever. So we can't actually see what the problems are for each different group. So these are some of the discussions that we're having, and we're trying to, knuckle down and say, actually, we really need better, robust research that looks at individual communities and barriers that are shared and how they can be tackled in a more comprehensive way.
Yeah, I know. And there was a recent thing actually about the University of Oxford. I don't know if you saw it. I think you did see it. It was on Twitter, wasn't it? About saying BME does not mean that you've got more Black students. So yes, classic example. And again, how that's peddled. And if you don't dig deeper into what that actually means, it's very easy to miss that there are big gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something like I'm really passionate about talking about, that I actually really don't like the term BAME, but it's like a well understood research policy term. So sometimes, I have to use it because there's not enough space in certain papers or whatever to unpack different terminology, and it's the term that is status quo. But within that, I have to keep challenging and speaking about using it, because it masks a lot of health inequalities and gaps. People say they appointed a BAME candidate, or that, X amount of people from BME jobs are in, senior positions. But then when you break that down to what that actually means, often there is disproportionate number of groups represented, and then there's like none of anybody else. So actually no headway has been made for some demographics, within that system. And I think sometimes it's actually deliberate, because then people don't need to account for the fact that progress has not been made. So I do think there's a lot to be said about terminology, using the right terminology at the right time in relation to the issue that you're trying to address. A lot of the time people want to just use one term or use an individual term. And I often have to say, actually, some days it's people of color, but sometimes you're actually talking about Black Caribbean, Black people, South Asian people, or Indian people. You have to call it what it is and address the problem with the right language at the right time.
Yeah, I absolutely hear that. And then if I could get you to just maybe think about workplaces, not necessarily medical workplaces, but workplaces in general, what would be your top 3 tips? Because one of my most popular episodes was about Black mental health, but I'd love to hear from you about what your top 3 tips for creating an inclusive space for mental health and wellness in the workplace for people of colour would be.
Whew, big question.
I was going to say, yeah, easy to solve.
I mean, I always talk about like diversity versus like decolonizing, diversifying versus decolonizing, because a lot of people try to like conflate the two, and talk about the two. But I think in terms of mental well-being for people of color in a workplace is often intrinsically linked to a lack of diversity, or linked to a lack of kind of understanding, which kind of often goes side by side. So first of all, if your workplace is diverse and more inclusive, then obviously people are going to feel more comfortable about being there and not feel isolated and othered. However, that doesn't go necessarily without saying, because it can also have other toxic atmospheres. But I do think that definitely helps. I think definitely talking is key. Depending on what jobs people are in, people can be at a desk or people can live very isolating lives now, and we know that loneliness is like an epidemic. And I think creating more social spaces or ways for people kind of to debrief or talk to people or do something like fun throughout the day. I know that some workplaces are more edgy than others, having like football tables and ping pong tables and bean bags and that kind of thing. But these things genuinely help, allow people to move around the space. They're not like locked in to their desk all day. And to be honest, this can be implemented everywhere. Obviously, I work in the health sector and people can be like, oh, it's not conducive to have those kind of things. But at the same time, our clinic, kitchen is really communal. So even if people just have some space to go make tea and know they can take a 5-minute break there and all sit around and have a chat throughout the day, that really, really considerably breaks things up. And then I think lastly is just like having, these all sound probably quite cliche, but like having a holistic approach. I mean, I've, spent quite a number of my years at university and going through different educational institutions. And I think what is remarkable is that I went to really big big educational institutions. I had a lot of people in my year group, and I really felt like a number the whole time that I went through educational systems, until like pretty much my master's, where I sat down and, there was a good pastoral care team, and they asked me just like generally how life was. And that checking in and holistic approach and people understanding that you have multiple things going on in your life at any one time. Most people do, Some people don't, which is also fine to just, have 1 or 2 things. But a lot of people, there's family, they're trying to study for something, or, do some kind of self-improvement, or they have hobbies or whatever. That understanding of your employee or colleague as literally a multi-faceted person that has other things going on in their life is so key, because there's been times where people say a cruel or unkind word to somebody and they don't realize that actually they got some really bad news today, or that person's miscarrying, or they miscarried a week ago or something. People make a lot of assumptions when they have literally no idea. So I think holistic approach to employees and trying to ascertain what else that person has going on in their life is great.
Thank you, Annabel. You said some of it was cliched, but I don't think it is at all, actually. I think you've given really helpful suggestions, because often I think some people can feel very uncomfortable and think, well, it's okay, we're all the same. And I also think it's about acknowledging people aren't the same, as in, they will need slightly different treatment, or they'll need to be spoken to, they're just there's difference. You want to be equal and fair to people, but that doesn't mean you treat everyone the same.
And just on that point, just to add kind of my last point about being multifaceted and having other things going on in their lives, especially for people of colour. Now, it's something that's difficult for some people to realise that don't have, othered aspects to their identity, or face kind of more discrimination or prejudice, but something bad going on in the world, for example, that disproportionately affects, I don't know, like black men, for example. So if a case hits the news about another unarmed black man being killed or something, that can affect your black employees, like in a way that you, if you're not a black person, can't necessarily understand or fathom, you know? It makes them feel like this world is like against them or really negative. And I think that's actually a really important thing to understand, and not just in relation to people of color, but whether that be a sexuality thing. Negative news stories or bad things happening in the world that disproportionately target certain demographics can actually really bring somebody's mental health down. So I think that's not acknowledged enough, and I don't think people give people room to actually have that conversation.
No, I think, again, it's one of those things that can feel very uncomfortable for people, or people think, well, that's happening over there, it's not happening to you, not realizing the impact that those global events or local events or national events will have on someone.
Yeah, we live in a very global world, and I think people don't, social media, news stories, like something happening, flooding or like the bushfires happening in Australia, for some people that is going to have a big impact, whether because it's their families there, whether it's because, that issue is particularly close to their heart. Some people do feel certain things slightly more deeply. And I just think, we should be given room to have those discussions, and it all should just be okay for big news stories or, these big global issues to truly affect somebody. I don't think that makes somebody soft or unable to cope. It's just the reality of the world we live in now. We can't ignore certain things because of the way media and news breaks.
Yeah, I know, it's so true. And we don't live in silos in a way, do we, because of this exposure to all this information in news.
Yeah, we're constantly plugged in. It's a really difficult thing to to kind of deprogram yourself, but it's a reality.
And so, as well as a Sex Fest for 2020, what are your hopes, aims, ambitions as a doctor, and also for decolonising contraception for 2020?
I think, firstly, I'd just say I'm really just enjoying being given multiple platforms and space to talk about these really vital issues that, as I say, transcend not just sexual health, but into all across the healthcare sector. So wherever the decolonising contraceptive wave takes me, I'm happy. But in terms of planning, I really, increasingly, I'm going into universities to have these conversations with students and see how they relate some of the issues that we discuss to their own areas of practice. These are conversations that were very much missing for me at university, and I had to kind of self-educate and read around on my own and see how they impacted on my own clinical practice. So it's really nice to start building some of these ideas into curriculums now, and seeing that change and how that transpires. So that's something that I really hope could go further. I think that we're linking up with more researchers and trying to explain to them how they can be more innovative and build trust in communities that have typically not engaged with health research, and how we can do that in a better way. So I really hope that over the next few years, people are going to actually start generating research for certain demographics that's much needed, because they can get that data because people want to take part in trials. They're not scared of healthcare professionals taking advantage of them or using that information and breaking down some of those barriers. So that's something I'm really excited about. In terms of Sex Fest, I think that I'm really excited for that to be like a fun way for people to discuss their sexual reproductive health. Often it's so weighty within our communities, and it's, there's so much stuff there to unpack, whether it's sexual health stuff, whether it's physical well-being, or whether it's just knowing where that information is. So I'm super excited just for that to be a fun day and to give lots of different people space to run workshops and talk about the stuff that they want to talk about. And I hope that if it's successful, then it is something that can continue, and we can keep doing like other workshops, whether that be on like pleasure and well-being, whether that be on smears, like just, and finally, my hope is, and I always say this, we call it decolonizing contraception, but we talk about all of sexual reproductive health. And one of the reasons I did that is because I was really keen to emphasize about contraception discussions and sexual health discussions also being relating to cisgendered men, so, you know, and heterosexual men who often don't engage with these discussions at all. So I'm so excited to get more heterosexual men of colour on board to have these conversations and taking part in sex fests and things like that, because some of their health outcomes are just really bad, and just because of stigma and masculinity, people don't want to talk about the problems that they face in this area.
Yeah, I know. That's really helpful. I think it's interesting the point you made about cisgendered heterosexual men as well. So yeah, trying to get people to, as many people as possible, to different types of people to engage with the agenda.
Yeah, just taking the messages as wide and as far as possible from the public to academic institutions, and breaking down some of those barriers between those groups.
So if people want to know more about your work, and I've included some of the links in the show notes, so the website, the Twitter, your Twitter and Instagram, but is there anything specific you want to tell people about if they want to know more about your work or get involved in decolonizing contraception and, of course, the Sex Fest?
Yeah, so I think I've kind of mentioned a few things as I've gone along, but if you go to www.decolonizingcontraception.com, then you can find more information about the Sex Fest, taking part, volunteering, sponsors, stalls, all of that kind of stuff. If you have any other questions, then you can email us, and there's a contact form on the website. In terms of myself, you can follow me on Twitter at Sowemimo, and you can also follow Decolonizing Contraception on Twitter and Instagram. And again, you can find the links to those on our website. But with Decolonizing Contraception, we're kind of constantly developing new events or ideas based on conversations we've had at other events and in other spaces as a collective of individuals. We're not funded. As I said, Sex Fest was a crowdfunder campaign. We are literally funded by different collaborations and consultancy we do with like different organizations at the moment. So everything is really quite organic in terms of what happens next. We're just really committed to making sure that we're bettering health, sexual health, and improving health inequalities for people of colour, and responding to the conversations that people are having, even if that's just creating space and destigmatizing the issue. So yeah, that's us.
Oh, thank you so much, Annabel. It's been a joy to have you on the show, and I hope people, if you're listening, don't forget the show notes. We've got all the links. Please do get involved, and we hope to see you at the Sex Fest in April. And thank you so much, and we will check in with you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.